Good evening. Welcome into another episode of Cap and Trade. I am your host, Texans Cap. You can follow me on Twitter at Texans Cap. If you prefer the written format, you can follow along at capandtrade.substack.com. Thanks everybody for joining in tonight. Our esteemed guest is on the phone with somebody he needs to talk to, so he'll hop on here in a few minutes. Mr. Aaron Wilson of KPRC Channel 2. So we'll get things going until Aaron gets off the phone call and can hop over to us. But, basically tonight, what I wanted to cover, the combine finished up, closed out, just a jam-packed, probably last 5 days, especially on Twitter and social media, of what all we saw. And, it's just kind of some of the stuff I wanted to cover tonight. Talk about the Jalen Carter slide, how far he's going to slide. Does Houston stay at number 2? What does Chicago do at number 1? The overall theme from the combine, is the quarterbacks, wide receivers kind of had a little rough day, but edge players, there's some the edges had a really big day or big week. Quarterbacks were really interesting as well. Running backs did really well. And then, until we got franchise tags coming up in the next 48 hours, those are due by 3 p.m. on Tuesday, and any free agent targets that Houston may be targeting or things like that. So, but with that, if you got any questions, comments, throw them up on the board. We'll try to get to everything we can. Hey, Chris, good to see you. Thanks for joining in. Beige, always good to see you, man. Yeah. So like I said, Aaron's on the phone right now, so we'll get to him. He'll hop on here in a few minutes since he gets off the phone. Never know with him, and he stays so busy. That phone stays glued to his ear, I swear, sometimes. I sit right next to him in the press box, so I see how busy he stays. And Joe, good to see you, bud. Tight ends look very good in this draft, man. They showed out this week as well, and we'll get to all that. John, good to see you as always. I know you're always here, but the first thing, the Jalen Carter news, really, and I kind of spoke a little bit about it on last Wednesday. We had the big news come out with him and the misdemeanor crimes, and he got turned himself in, made bond, flew back out to Indianapolis and conducted his interviews and things like that. So it'd be a lot for the teams to dig into and to determine, where he fits on their board, where he, what the perception is if a team were to draft him, things like that. And it really just kind of shakes things up at the top of the board. And, I would have been perfectly convinced that Chicago could take Jalen Carter number 1 overall and be perfectly fine with that move. But it seems like the sense coming out of the combine now is that Chicago will trade out at number 1 spot. And, they're probably going to get a good haul. I just don't think it's a kind of package that they're going to get. I don't think it's one that Houston needs to be competing for. I think they're pretty, who they end up taking at number 2, hopefully it's a quarterback, maybe it'll be Bryce Young, maybe it'll be somebody else. But there's just no sense in them making the move up to 1 unless they're just for sure confident that Bryce Young is the guy, or whoever it is, whichever quarterback it is. I'm not saying who it is. That's just my preference, Bryce Young. I've made that pretty clear on this channel. But there's no sense for them to move up, because if Indy moves up, something like that, it's going to be a swap into the first this year, their second rounder, and a 2024 first. That's a lot to swallow for Houston just to move up 1 spot to avoid getting leapfrogged. And so, like I said, with this Jalen Carter news, I think Arizona really slides into the driver's seat per se. I think maybe Chicago can trade out of it and get a big move up from Carolina or Atlanta or Las Vegas. One of those teams also looking for a quarterback. But I still have trouble seeing it. I just don't see it for Chicago. I feel like if Indianapolis is not in Carolina, and my opinion based on things I've seen and things I've heard and people I talked to, it feels like Indianapolis and Carolina are both heavy in on Stroud. I'm not buying the Will Levis thing. I feel like those two teams are really going to be targeting CJ Stroud. There's no reason for neither of those teams to jump up to number one to go for Stroud. I think they can get him at number 3. And that's why I say Arizona's in the driver's seat. I think Arizona is going to be able to cultivate a bidding war. They have a new GM there, Monty Osenfort. He came from New England, went through Tennessee, has a very extensive background coming up through those systems and making those kind of trades. So I feel like he could easily move back with one of those teams and get a pretty good haul and then one of those two, Indianapolis and Carolina, theoretically in this kind of exercise would be having a bidding war. And that's why I have trouble buying the Chicago thing, trading out of one. I just have trouble buying it. And we'll talk to Brad Spielberger on Wednesday. He's pretty clued into the Chicago Bears, so we'll kind of get his read on the situation as well. So I think at the end of the day, it's just you stay at 2. It's pretty simple. So, but like I said, if you're just hopping in, our guest is running a little behind. So as soon as he gets off the phone, he'll join us. If you got any questions, comments, concerns, throw them up on the board. We'll get to it. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel. It helps us out, helps the channel get visibility, helps the channel get more views and grow, and allows me to do cooler and better things for everybody. Hit that like button as well. That all helps out. TJ, good to see you. Hennessy says all in for AR-15. Man, has he been, whew. Talking about Texans Twitter having fun. Anthony Richardson is just all over Texans Twitter. And, showing out like he did athletically at this draft. And at this combine, just really solidifies him as a very intriguing prospect. Would I be upset that Houston took him instead of Bryce Young? Yeah, a little bit. But who am I to say that he's not any worse or any better? So, but looks like we've got Mr. Aaron about to hop on here. So if you got any questions, make sure you throw them up on the board. We'll get to everything we can. And let's get Mr. Aaron in here. Let me get this. Aaron.
Troy, sorry I was late. I was wrapping a call with a source and give a little bit of advice too. But it's good to talk to you. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate it. It's good to always chat with you. So you got back from Indy the other night, and a lot of things happened at Indy this past week. But what was kind of the overall theme you think coming out of Indy from your perspective and the folks you talked to out there?
Well, for the Texans, obviously the quarterback search is first and foremost, and that's what the hot button issue is. There's a different set of things in terms of your own free agents and conversations, hypotheticals, I should put it, with, agents that may have other, free agents, that sort of thing that all of the teams do. When you think about the Texans and their meetings, they were all very predictable. So they met with all the top quarterbacks. So you meet with the Bryce Young, you meet with CJ Stroud, you meet with Will Levis, and you meet with Anthony Richardson, who obviously aced the combine and is an outstanding athlete. I mean, he's like Cam Newton and Lamar Jackson put together. Mm-hmm. He's just incredible. But does that mean incredible quarterback? That's what they have to figure out. So they were focused on that. They look at some wide receivers, look at some pass rushers, look at D linemen, offensive linemen. So all the meetings are really logical. And it's essentially an evaluation period. They didn't bring their coaches except for D'Amico Ryans, and I think they had a few other staff members there. But primarily it's for Nick Caserio and his personnel department. And Nick was there, I think, until Friday night, or I think it was when he went back. So you have, a short window of time, and some of it is spent talking with reporters and doing the media thing, and that's part of it too. Is just kind of the front facing part of the combine, which is a media and television event now. But for guys like Nick Caserio, primarily it's about the medical, it's about the meetings and what he can learn. And, he's been working on this all year. So this is just a continuation for reporters or for, others. It's more of like, oh, wow, this is like first big exposure to all of this college football information and ranking these guys and deciding, well, does this 40 time mean this? What is a Jalen Carter? How does that impact the draft, his legal situation, all those things? And it's like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. And then by April, you have some of the information you need. If you're, even a plugged in reporter, and if you're a team, you feel like you know it and you're got some kind of comfort level. But it's really about learning enough and then having systems, trusting your instincts, trusting your board, and then making good decisions. And you're impacted by everyone else's decisions, good or bad. I think it's interesting. It's a fascinating time because it's the roster building time for the offseason.
Yeah, and you mentioned Jalen Carter, and I was kind of touching on that before you hopped on. What is your sense of his draft stock now? I mean, is it a big slide or is it a little slide? I mean, I know it's early and teams are going to have to do a little more background work now based on what news came out. And, I know it's probably going to vary from team to team. Some teams could easily just take him off their board completely, and some may still value him as a top, high first round pick. Is there any sense of what you kind of came away with on Jalen Carter and his status?
Well, Troy, it really comes down to how badly do you need a defensive tackle. And most people really need players like that. And then what's your comfort level? Here's what I believe and what others believe. He's not going to jail. He is facing these misdemeanors. He's going to, if he settles, probably look at some kind of probation or community service. It's not good. Obviously, it's a very negative public relations situation. And his image and, being involved in reckless driving allegedly and racing allegedly and factually being there, for the scene of this tragic accident that cost a staffer from the Georgia football program and a teammate's life. So most importantly, it's this human element, and we're not, and you're not, and I'm not, we're not ignoring that at all. That's a fact. But the other fact is that what's the fallout from this? So there's two things: fallout legally. And I don't think that he's going to, have any unavailability. I think he'll be available to play. And that's good for the teams that want him. If there's a lot more derogatory information, there's already been, I've heard a few things about maybe attitude. They weren't like enough to be a major red flag, but it did sound like, he's a bit mouthy and says some things to opponents and sometimes to teammates that aren't so great. Then there was an obvious PR push, like, hey, what about him paying for this walk-on's food out of his own pocket? That's great, but that doesn't mitigate everything else because he did that. And you saw that probably on Twitter that there was some saying, oh, Todd McShay is a hater. Well, guess what? Todd McShay obviously had some inside information for him to be as strong as he was. So I think, maybe people should think a little more about saying, hey, Todd McShay was dead on. And I don't think he was being a hater. I think he's just, trust the information that he's giving. He's doing reporting. And a draft analyst is allowed to report. They don't have to only be opinion like on who's the best 3 technique. He can have an opinion based on his information because he's talking to people. How else do those draft analysts have any information? They have to talk to people. It's similar to what we do with reporting, except we're going to probably report stuff and say sources say this guy's fallen on a board or there's some off-field concerns. And generally what I tend to do when I hear a lot of this stuff, unless there's a lot of documentable offenses, then I tend to keep it to myself and I just know it in the back of my mind because you never want to be viewed as like, oh, well, you're going off of a lot of secondhand information and you're hurting someone's stock and their reputation. So, you have to think about all those things and is it really worth it? But yeah, I think that he was, dead on, obviously. This is a serious allegation. And of course, he's innocent until proven guilty. But I thought it was smart that Drew Rosenhaus had him return to the combine to face the music.
Yep.
And like, it wasn't like he'd been kicked out of the combine because he's in jail. He bonded out and he went back to the combine to finish his responsibilities as far as interviews and medical. And I thought that was smart for them to bring him back in terms of the look of
hiding out.
They were not hiding. Yes. So I think that's important. But does this mean if he's not going first, he's not going second, is he going third? Is he still going in the top 10? I think he's going somewhere in the top 10 still. As long as, this case doesn't go completely sideways. I mean, who knows what else might come out? I think that's the unpredictable part. And I don't pretend to know or be close to anything about his legal. I know what I've read in the, just the statements that are released by the police and the warrant. And so I don't think there's been any other real deep dive into it other than, the local media there kind of knew it was coming down, that there was going to, in Georgia, that they're about to charge him. And they did. Timing of that was a big conversation at the combine. Like, why is it being done while he's at the combine? Wasn't this investigation probably ready to go? Could they have done it before he went there? It's almost like
it's always fantastic timing with those kind of things.
There's never a good time to be charged with misdemeanor.
Right. No, but I'm saying it's like right on the eve of the combine. It's just, I don't know if it's coincidence.
A lot of people thought like, they're trying to ruin his stock or they're looking for, I think it's more that they're looking for maximum attention. Like that we're tough on, crime, that we take this seriously and we're going to, file this case and he's going to be held accountable. I think that it's no more complicated than that.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, that's what I kind of pegged it as similar to like the Laramie Tunsil slide, you slide back 4 or 5 spots and somebody will end up getting him and I
don't think it's ruinous to his draft, situation. I think that like Tunsil years later, we'll be talking about him as a top lineman. I think that's what will happen.
All right, so there's a question on here about, so Aaron, what is the percentage of the Texans trading for the number 1 pick?
They're trying to sell the pick, the Bears. And I even heard a rumor today that there's a team that they're talking with where it could be done even before free agency. And because it involves a player. So, I didn't hear which player or which team, but Poles told someone who told me. So it's, again, like secondhand, but it's an interesting tidbit that came to me this afternoon that Poles is having those kind of conversations. Poles being Ryan Poles, the general manager of the Bears.
Yep.
So, they're definitely willing to sell the pick. And here's the thing about this draft. You'd rather have more picks. It's a deep draft. Mm-hmm. It lacks star quality. And all the quarterbacks, so I'm sure we'll get into that, there's something wrong with all the quarterbacks. There's something that you would wish they were much better at. There's no Peyton Manning. I would go so far as to say you should not trade for the first pick.
Yeah.
That the Bears should have to stay in that spot. And I don't think there's a player worthy of it. I wouldn't do it if I'm the Texans unless it's a minimal price. One person I talked with today said they think that the Bears would ask the Texans for the 12th pick, the 2nd pick, and something additional.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with that. I think that that's probably what they would ask for, and you can haggle. But I mean, I'll give you an example. Let's do this scenario. That pick, you do that. Let's say it's a 2, a 12, and a 4, or 2, 12, and a 3, or next year or something. Next year's 2, perhaps, and you lose the 12th pick, and that gets you Bryce Young, who's undersized quarterback that maybe you could have drafted at 2.
Yeah. Or
you could draft Stroud instead, who's more of a prototypical quarterback, but not as dynamic. Are you happy? If you're a Texans fans.
No, I'm not.
I don't think it's a good idea, but
no.
If I'm Nick, I'm looking more to move back, or I just make a decision that I'm not Bryce Young or bust.
We'll I mean, I think it's perfectly conceivable that if Chicago does try out of that pick and say Houston did want Bryce Young and somebody leapfrogs them and takes Bryce Young, then you fall back on Will Anderson or something like that. I mean, that's still a fantastic draft pick at number 2 overall, and you just kind of figure it out from there. But to offer up that, to have to give up that much to make that one slot move, like you said, there's nobody in this draft that
There's no way they're just doing it like, hey, even though no one else is making us an offer, give us a 2 and we'll give you the pick. I mean, like, we have to be sure. Maybe that happens when they're on the clock and they're able to squeeze something out of it.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm just not buying it. I'm probably going to be completely wrong, but I feel like Chicago's not going to be able to trade out of it.
It's way early. I think
It
that
is.
people are interested. The thing is now, I heard a little bit today that Stroud is who the Colts prefer, or at least who their general manager prefers, and Steichen. That Bryce is more the Texans guy, and that Stroud, and then it's hard to find like where Richardson and Levis going, and Levis might not even go in the top 10. Like, it's possible Levis has to wait a little longer.
I heard Carolina and Indy both in on Stroud.
Yep.
And so Carolina may have to leap Indy up and go up to number 3.
It's going to cost them so much. It's going to cost them a ton. And we're talking about trades, so one player that comes to mind, we think about moving. I don't know who they'd be moving for, but DeAndre Hopkins, is he part of a deal? Because the Cardinals, they're thinking about trying to trade him. So is he part of anything that they're doing, a maneuver? Would they want to go up with him? Would they get better terms? Would the Bears like to have a Hopkins paired with the Justin Fields? That was another thing that was just a really big takeaway, is that the Bears are okay with Fields. They want to just keep going with him.
Yep.
And I've heard that from several sources around the league that are familiar with the Bears' way of thinking, and I've had direct conversations with them.
Yeah. No, that's pretty much my read on the situation on the outside looking in. And it's, we'll just have to wait and see. But it is interesting because like a lot of the rumors now that they're going to get the trade done sooner rather than later if they do trade out of number 1. And that's the thought process behind that, which I kind of agree with. It kind of lets you get you set for free agency when you already know your picks. And it also, if Chicago were to come out with like extra 2, extra 3rd round or whatever, maybe because they need to do some pretty heavy spending.
It doesn't make sense to me, Troy.
They can use some of those additional draft picks to trade for veterans or something like that. Is why I say it's good to get that draft capital early. Yeah.
Oh, it'd be great to do, ideal, but the way this thing works is no one wants to have a serious conversation with you until you're really like in the final days before the draft and deadlines for action, all that kind of thing. What I think is the most likely scenario, they're talking that day, like the trade happens, in the hours before the show starts. And that's what the league would want too, by the way.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, they would love to have a trade or something go down like
trade that
2 hours,
clock,
2 hours beforehand, or
and so let's say it's the Texans. Does that mean it's Bryce Young, and what are they going to do, and all those sorts of things? And it'll be like this closely guarded secret. It'll be an interesting situation.
Yeah,
but it's just a lot of it is very much a moving target.
Yeah, starting to get a few questions about Brandon Cooks. And, if you think he's going to make it back, or if you think a trade's going to happen one way or another at some point in the next couple of weeks. Have you got any new information on that front?
Right. There are multiple teams interested in him. And I've heard, a little bit about the Broncos. I've heard a little bit about, LA being a possibility, likely LA Rams more than LA Chargers. I've heard, the Patriots have had some interest in Brandon, one of his old teams. Broncos, obvious connection because of Sean Payton. Nothing concrete or moving just yet. And he reiterated his desire to be traded when he talked with the Texans. So, he hasn't changed his mind on wanting a trade. There's still a rebuild, and he was very clear on what he wanted. He wanted to play for a contender. They're not a contender. That hasn't changed just because you have a head coach with a lot of upside and a lot of popularity and excitement surrounding him as a charismatic leader. He has all of those things, and there is hope in Houston primarily because of D'Amico, Ryan's presence here. But that doesn't move him necessarily because he's toward the end of his career, and he's continued to train and get ready for whoever he's going to play for. The trade doesn't make much sense because you're not going to get a lot back. So I understand the Texans' perspective of what D'Amico put out there was, we'd like to work with him. Well, of course you'd like to work with him because he's a good wide receiver, and you're going to want to have to pay most of his salary for him to leave. So no, it doesn't make sense for him, for the Texans. But like Mike Tomlin likes to say, and I think it's a great line, I don't know if he was the first one to come up with this, you want volunteers, not hostages. You don't want, him being forced to play. But, the vibe I was getting from some of the comments were, we're going to play hardball. We're not going to make it that simple. I think it's a respectful, amicable process, but at the same time, the Texans have to do, as D'Amico said, what's in their best interest. What's in their best interest would be to talk him into playing for them if you can't get a good trade going. I don't know if you can get the trade going. I think it's going to be a bad trade where they're just dumping him and you're buying a pick, just like Osweiler. You're just getting out of this. And I don't even know if you're buying a third-round pick at this point. Maybe you're buying a fourth-round pick and you're paying $12 million of the 18.
Yeah,
maybe it gets better. If you pay the whole thing, can you buy a second rounder? Probably, but I don't think most people want to give you a second rounder. Dallas was talking about a second rounder last year, but now you're not hearing about Dallas a lot right now in these trade discussions. So my sense is that it's not real hot right now. And it doesn't have to happen before free agency. There's no real artificial or actual deadline on this thing.
Yeah, I mean they're not hurting for cap space and the fact that they would need to trade him sooner rather than later to get that additional
Helps them
$10
that
million.
there's a bad wide receiver class. The fact that Jacoby Myers may get big money is amazing to me.
Yeah.
And I know everyone was like so much in an uproar about Christian Kirk. That wound up actually not being a bad move, Troy.
Yeah.
Or Jacksonville. Yeah, he did well. I think that
for them.
Their evaluation of him was a good one.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it just depends, like you said, it's how much money they're going to take on. My kind of thoughts were like, same with you. Like if you eat 6 or 8 million of it, maybe it becomes a fourth rounder instead of a fifth rounder or something like that. But whatever, I just kind of feel like it's just going to happen at some point. It's just when, if it's more closer to the draft or early on in free agency. But like you said, it doesn't have to happen. It's not something that's needed to be done from a cap perspective. They can kind of sit on it and work their way towards the draft. So, but so I appreciate everybody listening tonight. If you're just joining in, Aaron Wilson of KPRC Channel 2 is joining us. I am your host, Texans Cap. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. All right, so talked about Brandon Cook. So Laramie Tunsil, potential extension. I know hadn't been a little quiet on that front. I don't know what kind of timeline the team and Tunsil could be looking at. There's to some cap savings to be had on an extension with him, considering his inflated salary cap number this year after the back-to-back restructures, pushing it up to $35 million this year. So they need to find a way to bring that number back down. And extension seems like the most likely path. Do you have a sense on, if that's still a possibility and what kind of timeline the two sides might be looking at?
Yes, still a possibility. Both sides have interest. I think Laramie has more interest than they do. They're not super into the idea of, other than the cap reason, and that Laramie's a Pro Bowl tackle, of handing out a ton of extensions and raises for players after a 13-1 season. Optics not being so good. But, he's one of the only exceptions. Like, for example, could Malik Collins be a little underpaid? Yes. Steven Nelson, yes. Titus Howard wants a new deal, but I think he'll play into the 5th year. They'll have a few conversations maybe after the draft, but I don't anticipate a Titus Howard extension this offseason. And in my opinion, Laramie is the most likely. And there's a way to do the Laramie deal that can lower the cap, as you said, and get his APY up, which is what he wants. And some of that's a respect factor for Laramie. And with Laramie, they have I would say, a good track record of negotiations with him and his advisors, Saint, Omni, and La Lusani. And Laramie is his own agent, and he relies on their advice to do the extensions, that one being, mostly restructures, but the the first, big deal, the $22 million a year APY, the 3 for 66 that he did when he had been here for about a year.
Yeah.
I think, with Laramie, you've got to have some prestige players on this roster. You've got to have some guys. He's, other than, Damian Pierce, it's like neck and neck. Who are the best players? I would say like it's Laramie, then it's Damian on this roster. You've got to take care of somebody. And he had a great season. I don't see why you don't pay him. He's in his prime, and I don't think you're getting more than a first-round pick and a trade for him. And he doesn't want to be traded. He wants to be here. He's committed to helping them through the build. He likes living here. Some things that a lot of people don't really think about that much. They think, well, the players always want to play for the best team, or, what about this city or that city? He actually likes living here, likes his lifestyle. His brother Alex is a trainer and a yoga instructor and has built a life for himself here. So a lot of it's, it's your, inner circle, the folks that are around him. And Laramie is a homeowner here. He likes being in this area, enjoys the restaurants, enjoys the scene, likes a lot of things that are happening, is happy being in that locker room, has a lot of friendships. These are factors for guys. So like anywhere, if you were picking a place to work, Troy, like, well, do I want to live in Houston, or do I want to live in, Denver? Do I want to live in Los Angeles? Where do I want to live? What's the work situation like? And so the fact that Laramie's happy and on board, that's great. That's what you want. It's just a matter of, can you make it financially feasible? And I think they can, but I don't sense any rush. They have not begun negotiations, and maybe they'll start laying the groundwork for that soon. I think that was sort of the hope, but there is nothing imminent or developing right now. And, if that changes, then we'll do some reporting on it. But yeah, I check on these things pretty frequently, and I have not heard of talks.
Yeah, and if they end up doing the extension, he's gonna reset the market. He'll be the number one paid left tackle.
They're not gonna. There'd be no point not to. And even if that's 25 or 50 grand more, or whatever, 100 grand more, whatever it might be, if he's a million above Trent Williams, he's younger than Trent.
Yep.
But they're totally different style of players. Like Trent's more of a power player. Laramie is more of a athleticism kind of guy, and he has power too. But like Trent is like one of the more big drive blockers to play the left tackle position, probably in the last couple decades.
Yeah. No, I'm with you on that. We'll, like you said, we'll kind of keep an eye on it, and if for those who are watching the show, if you go back to the channel, I did a contract building session on Laramie Tunsil about 3 weeks ago. If you want to go watch that and see what kind of potential contract that Tunsil would command. So sticking with the Texans, I think probably for their own pending free agents, I guess like the players that I really would like to see the team try to re-sign would be Tavierre Thomas and Ogbo Okoronkwo. I'm still not sure on Okoronkwo if he's going to fit what D'Amico wants out of the defensive end. Looking back at San Francisco's roster, everybody was 260 and up, pretty big guys on the defensive end, and Okoronkwo was a little bit lighter at 245. So be curious. And his market, I just can't really get a feel for his market. I've talked to a few people, and some people it's saying it's going to be low, and there's some people that saying you could get as much as $10 million a year, and then some people are saying it's going to be only $4 or $5 million a year. So those are probably my top two players that I would like to see resigned. Other players like Owens or Chris Moore, those are maybe good, strong depth guys, but I think those two are the top two players of my mind.
I'll give you a few updates. I don't have it definitively what they will do, but I'm getting some tea leaves on this.
Okay.
With Obo, yes, there's mutual interest on Obo potentially coming back to the Texans. And it doesn't mean that there will be a deal done. He'll have a market. It will not be a $10 million market. And that's because of his size, and because he only really was having production there once he got to play a lot. So he's a bit of a projection. And I would say it'll be between $4 million and $6 million. And I've heard that for other defensive linemen, they're in the same category, 5 to 6, even guys that had great seasons like Charles Omenihu. But Charles, even though he hasn't been charged, does not expect to be charged, did have an arrest for a domestic situation. Mm-hmm. And he's a much different style of player. And I've even heard about the Texans being something that, that's not completely ruled out as a return. I've heard of multiple teams being interested, the Raiders, and the 49ers. So I think he'll have a market. There are, I did say, there's some pass rushers, but there's like Samson Ekubon. A lot of these guys, I think, are going to wind up having to sign short-term deals. I think that Draymond Jones will be like the biggest contract, and he's more inside. But, you look at some of these deals that'll happen. Poona Ford will do well in free agency, someone that I've heard, potentially could be of interest to the Texans. So they do need a D tackle. It makes some sense for them. He's logical. Don't know if they'll actually move on him or not, but he'll have options. Including Seattle, he's a good football player. There's a lot of good football players. And, there's some guys like Ashawn Robinson, Greg Gaines are out there. No, Obo doesn't classically fit what they want, but the film doesn't lie, and I believe the personnel department are big believers in him. And he outplayed his contract last year. So if he's coming back and it's at a raise, from the 3.5, and he's getting to like 5 or an upside to 6, and that's workable. What if it's like a 3 for 18 type of situation or 2 for 12, and you guarantee about half of it? Maybe you can get it done. And because he has a desire to stay, and that's really very real. With Jonathan Owens, I haven't heard of him being anything imminent for a re-signing. I think he will test the market. And there's some other safeties out there like Nick Scott from the Rams that could be of interest. I think they're not going to be in the Jesse Bates type of category.
Right.
They have a Jalen Petrie. They don't need to have a Jesse Bates. They need a good second safety. I've heard Eric Murray could be back. I've heard that Tremont Smith will have an opportunity to come back if he wants to, but also have a market where other places where maybe he could play more defense. So that's a possibility. As you saw, they did John Weeks' deal. He signed on Monday. They announced on Thursday, and it's almost fully guaranteed. So good for John. And that's important. You want to get your long snapper, under contract, and they did. So they made him a priority. They did that, quickly. And I expect more things. I expect some roster cuts. I think Mario Addison, Christian Kirksey are potential cuts. I could see more changes happening with this roster. I think that they are not done with subtractions. So look for, some more moves like that. And just for guys they don't see being a part of it. They only did that one in-season extension that was for Blake Cashman. So he's back and, at a salary that they can afford for him on a backup deal. Scott Quesenberry is of interest to potentially return on kind of a prove-it deal, probably like a 1-year deal. I think he'll be offered. I think that Scott could come back and be an opportunity to compete for the backup job. I've heard of them having interest in other free agents, and I think that at some point, maybe they're signing whichever of those centers that isn't getting the biggest money, maybe a few days into free agency they're talking to. So we'll see. I think there's going to be some high salaries for the Bosemans and the Posticks, and even Brindell will do well. So
Brindell is one that I saw, and I'm just having a tough read on that because he just had one good season, but he's a little bit older.
I think he winds up staying, but if he makes it out there, he'd be someone that would be probably worth looking at. And they've got a lot of work to do. They've got a lot of free agents. Got my list up here. It's it's pretty heavy group of free agents and decisions to have to make. The truth of it is, you should not run it back with 3-13-1 roster.
No,
you should make changes and make as many changes as you want. And I don't think there's a whole bunch of if you don't have him back, it's the end of the world. If any of those players I was talking about don't come back, that's fine. You replace them with someone else. And I thought Obo deserved to come back based on the way he played, and I think he has shown some real ability to get to the quarterback. I think they need a D tackle very badly.
Yeah,
they've got to have another D tackle to go with Malik Collins. I like the Poona Ford idea because he can get after the quarterback, he can stop the run, he can do a lot of things for you. But we'll see. There's other D tackles too. To me, the problem is he's going to cost between $9 and $11 million a year.
Right.
Yeah, so it's expensive.
And you already got Malik Collins under, like you said, not the biggest contract.
I could see them being better off possibly drafting one. There's still going to be D tackles available when they're drafting again in the second round, or do it at 12. What if there's a highly rated D tackle like the Clemson guy at 12? Should they do that instead of a receiver? They've looked at Quentin Johnson, they've looked at Jordan Addison, they've talked to those guys. Raheem Garrett's coming in for a visit. He's not a first rounder. He's a later guy from Maryland, from my high school, by the way, St. John's High School in D.C., home of the cadets,
Yep.
former WCAC all-star here, linebacker, and teammate of Under Armour's Kevin Plank. He's why the program's so good now, because a lot of money into it, but I digress.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean they've got a lot of places to fill. Like with it, like you said, with like the center position, that that's an area of need for them. And I feel like this offensive line is potentially a center away from being a top 15 type of offensive line. I feel like AJ can be serviceable. Hopefully Kenyon Green kind of makes his way back. And if you could get just a good anchor center with a veteran type, Connor McGovern, Brindle, somebody like that who's got a little bit of time in in the same type of system that Bobby Sloak will be bringing over, could really just be that final piece for that offensive line and really just get things going in the right direction for that offense. Because it's you build from the center out, the trenches. That's always kind of been my opinion of things. So I think that's one area. And like you said, they may not be big in on like that first wave of free agency with any big, huge signings, but maybe, like you said, day 2, day 3, second wave, third wave, when they start making a little bit of noise. Do you see Nick making any kind of big splash signings? Just maybe like one player that's, like a Tremaine Edmonds or somebody like that, or just any position where it's like day one, huge contract for this player? Or do you think they kind of go more second,
I haven't heard
third
of
wave?
him being a high bidder, really. I haven't heard about that in terms of meetings. I didn't even hear about an inordinate amount of, people looking at and saying the Texans, we expect them to be on the bidding side for some of those type of players. And as you have noticed by now, they're not a part of the Derek Carr thing. They have yet to become a part of the Jimmy G thing. So what are they doing? Is there going to be say like a Teddy Bridgewater? What are they going to be doing? Will they get involved with a Deontay Foreman? Or that's a maybe. And Foreman could be of some interest to them if he doesn't re-sign with the Panthers. So maybe you get a back before the draft to work in tandem with Dameon Pierce. And that would be interesting. So we'll see. I mean, the big thing is, you're talking about a time splitting situation, and Pierce is the featured back. So is that even attractive to Foreman to come here and not be the bell cow? I would think probably not. And also, when he was here the first time, I feel like he was a different guy. He was still maturing. He's changed a lot. He's become a dad. He's got 2 kids. His father passed in a trucking accident. I think it's been very motivating for him. Like that he didn't want to ever let his dad down, and he's changed a lot. I think you get a different Deontay Foreman, but I don't know if it's the right move to do. Just because I think he's a starter, in my opinion, not just a time splitting back. And I think ideally the second back that works in tandem with Pierce would be more of a pass catching kind of guy. So thinking about the draft, like the Tulane running back, guys like that.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. We had a question from Rod. Is there any chance Nick decides to draft Titus replacement in this draft, or is it a sure thing they give him a new contract some point down the line? I mean, before I let Aaron answer, my opinion on Titus Howard and the extension is I think that's something you look at maybe halfway through the season as an in-season type of extension move if he continues to play well and progress and show that he can be a long-term answer at the tackle position.
Right. I did ask DeMeco Ryans not about contracts, but just about the value of having those bookend tackles. And he was enthusiastic about the continued presence of Laramie and Titus. So it doesn't sound like Titus is a short timer at all. But organizationally, do they need to see even more from him after last season, which I think was a step in the right direction back at his natural right tackle spot? It makes more sense financially to do it early. It really does. And he's going to play for $13 million. So he makes that big jump on the 5th-year option, the club option they exercised last year. But, I think about the big picture. I would get him done. And I even had people tell me this. This was, from some others around the league that like the idea of trading Laramie and putting Titus at left tackle. I think he's much better at right tackle, though. So I didn't really agree with that opinion, but it was an opinion that was expressed to me, not by the organization, but by a different NFL official. It's interesting because you think about these things and you want to do it in cycles, like John Grenard, have a decision to make on him eventually.
Mm-hmm.
And, Malik Collins, and you've got a lot of guys in the, excuse me, final year of their deal. So how is all that going to work? They need layers and layers and layers of players, Bill O'Brien used to say, and they are not even close. I would just say for everyone, they have to be patient. I think they'll make with a quarterback if they have a rookie quarterback that's a successful rookie quarterback, like a Brock Purdy type of performance and beyond, then they'll have a chance to be like a 6-7 win kind of team if everything falls right. But they need a great offseason. To me, really, they're 2 off seasons away. 2024 is more the year I would look for them to come out of this.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think you start laying down the foundation and the path and try to determine who your core foundation is going to be based on your draft class and how they continue to perform. And yeah, 2024 is probably the year you really kind of come out swinging. So kind of venturing out of Houston, franchise tag deadline is Tuesday at 3 p.m. We know Houston's not going to use it on anybody, but it looks like the running back's probably going to get, Jacobs out of Las Vegas, Tony Pollard up in Dallas, and interesting to watch the New York Giants situation with Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. If they can get a Jones contract done in time to tag Barkley, I don't think they want to give Barkley the big contract. I think they'd rather put the tag on him. Maybe Orlando Brown in Kansas City might get a second tag, but do you feel like we're going to start to see some news on franchise tags here in the next 48 hours?
Yes, I think you'll see Lamar Jackson get the franchise tag.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you're looking through some of the lists of other ones. You'll see that happen with in Jacksonville with their tight end. So
yeah,
that'll
Evan Ingram, yep.
Yeah, Evan Ingram, yes, and Jesse Bates III, he'll be free. I think they're just going to let him go and move on. Tony Pollard, yes, I expect that to happen. And just kind of looking through some of the lists here, ones that predicted, expected. Texans, obviously none. I think Orlando Brown does get it, and Josh Jacobs, like you said, and then maybe less tags this year. Yeah, I don't think that the Patriots should tag Jonathan Jones. I think they should let him leave. I think Saquon Barkley gets it if Jones doesn't get it, if they get the deal done. And then I think James Bradbury will not be franchise tagged for Philly. I think he'll be free. Tayshaun Gibson will not be tagged by the Niners. I don't know why somebody put him on the list. I think Geno Smith will not be tagged. There's somebody was making a list. They just reached. I don't think Jamel Dean will be tagged. And Daron Payne, they've already tagged him.
They executed the tag there, yep.
Yeah. I don't know if it made the wire. I think it was more like communicated. I haven't seen like a franchise.
Oh no,
tag.
it was actually on the wire. The Daron Payne tag.
What day did it make it?
Thursday. Wednesday. It was Wednesday or
it's
Thursday
one of those days,
last week.
It's one of those days in Indy where probably I wasn't great at checking my emails, but I was. It's a lot. I can just tell you that the combine in terms of content and privileged to do it, and lots of television time with the Randy McElvoy and the KPRC guys, and that was a lot of fun. And we had I think some good hits and some time with D'Amico Ryans and Nick Casario and some extra time after the press conferences, and then the most important thing is the networking and hanging out and talking to agents and talking to teams and seeing other people in the business and the industry. So yeah, it was good. I mean, I got a lot out of it. Happy I get to go. Very exhausted still, kind of recharging from a lot of days where I would be up till like 3 a.m. and waking up at 7. I did that for about 4 days in a row. So yeah,
there'd be no way that I could do that. Now, Daron Payne was tagged on the 28th, Tuesday.
28th, gotcha.
But I did. Man, I would die if I had to do 3 a.m. for 3 days.
You don't have to. It's just like that's where a lot of people are out and about, and they're in meetings for a lot of the evening, including the agents and the teams. So you're seeing people later in the day, I mean, if you blow off the content part, I mean, there was one day where I didn't even really go to the convention center where they had the interviews for the defensive backs on Thursday. I just was there, like, again, Friday for the quarterbacks early at 8 a.m. for that after staying out late again. But I just kind of hung out and, had plenty of interviews and lots of work to do already. But, I think it's more valuable to see people and instead of just hunkering down. It's just a little off topic here, but just in terms of how you do the job.
Go ahead.
If all you're doing is hang out with your peer group, like the reporters, you're not really improving your ability to know anything. So, like, any of the information I have about who might or might not be back, that's gained by talking to people and people around the league. But if you just sit and, you write your stories and then you go have dinner and that's kind of it, I don't think you'll improve, much at all in terms of improvement, meaning improve your knowledge, improve your level of connections, get new phone numbers, things like that.
Yeah.
But there's some good parties got to attend. There's the Athletes First, the agency, they had a party that was pretty cool. That was good. Vanguard had one, and so usually some good food, an open bar, and a lot of agents. And in case the Athletes First one, there's a lot of coaches there. So plenty of coaches and GMs, guys like John Lynch, and even caught up with Rick Smith, the former Texans general manager, who's now in the diversity committee. I hadn't talked to him in years, so it was interesting to catch up with Rick and talk about
Rick's doing okay.
Yeah, he's okay.
Good.
He's doing good. His son is in college, and he still lives in Houston, and he's helping the league with diversity efforts. And I've heard his name come up a little bit. There was a rumor about him and the Raiders. I didn't ask him about it, but I kind of had some hunch that maybe that might be a fit. He was recently in the Raiders building, and it was on the heels of Marcel Reese resigning. Who knows? Maybe there might be a place for him to help Mark Davis be an advisor to him. But right now he's just doing his thing with the league where he helps them with diversity and inclusion efforts and try to improve those around the league. So that's Rick's role right now. And he seemed like he was doing well. But yeah, it was good to talk with him. I hadn't talked to him really since he had left the organization.
Yeah, he needs to be in the league. Despite what some folks may think, he was a very good general manager. And,
yes.
And I think that's a pretty consistent viewpoint on him. And so I think he can definitely help the team out regardless of what it is.
Yeah.
I think he would be
we had a great conversation. Yeah, he's a very smart guy. It was good talking with him. And he, I know that Sean eventually, for the fans, obviously the way the end result was a disappointment, but he was right about the football evaluation of Deshaun Watson.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I think that's the hits in the first round. That's a big part of his legacy here.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, that's about all the talking points I had for tonight.
Great.
I really appreciate you taking some time, and hopefully you get some rest. And I'm sure we'll be in touch over the next next few days as we get close to free agency, and things are going to get really ramped up here in the next week and a half, and be crazy. And make sure you're following Aaron on Twitter at Aaron Wilson _NFL. He'll be he's always very active on there, so tons of news coming out. And before we close it down, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the show. I appreciate all the comments, the questions, everybody joining in. I had 60, 70 people live at various points during the show. So, Aaron, hope you have a good evening, sir. Hope you get some rest, and we'll chat very soon.
Thanks, Troy. Appreciate you having me on.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And with that, we will shut it down. Have a good night.